The first thing I remember from that night isn't the music, or the crowd, or even her laugh. It's the sound of my own heartbeat. I could hear it pounding in my ears like someone had turned up the volume on my body. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even jealous. I was just frozen. Because there she was, my wife, moving with him like I was a ghost. I didn't even notice when it started. One moment, we were standing together near the edge of the dance floor, and the next, she was gone. Not gone, but swept away in this strange, magnetic pull towards some guy I'd never seen before. And when I found her again, my world tilted. She wasn't just dancing with him. It was the way she leaned in, the way her smile reached all the way to her eyes, the way his hand rested so casually on her lower back, as if I didn't even exist. Everyone else seemed to fade out. It was just them, tangled in a rhythm that wasn't meant for strangers. I wanted to shout her name. I wanted to storm over and remind her who I was, her husband. But instead, I stood there like a coward, my mouth dry, my fingers clenched around a glass I didn't even want. And then it hit me. This wasn't just a dance. It felt like a message. A cruel, silent message. You don't matter right now. So I walked. Not far at first. Just to the corner of the room. But the longer I watched, the more something inside me burned. I left. Just slipped out the door into the cool night air, like maybe if I left first, I'd win something. But standing out there alone, I felt like the loser I truly was. She came out 15 minutes later. 15 long minutes. And the first thing she said? Not an apology. Not I'm sorry. Not I love you. She just asked, why did you leave? Like I had no right to feel the way I did. But the thing that's haunting me is the look on her face when she saw me there, standing by the car, broken and shaking. It wasn't confusion. It was regret. Pure regret. Like she'd only just realized what she'd done. That moment was the first crack in our marriage. But it wasn't the last. In the days that followed, I started seeing things I wish I could unsee. Patterns. Secrets. And a side of Hannah I didn't know existed. The morning after that night, the house felt colder than usual. It wasn't the weather. It was something in the air, this heavy silence that sat between us like a brick wall. Hannah acted like nothing had happened. She hummed while making coffee, scrolling through her phone, smiling at something she read. And I just sat there, staring at her, wondering how she could be so calm when my chest still felt like it was cracking open. I didn't bring it up, not at first. Part of me was afraid of the answer I might get. What if she laughed? What if she said I was overreacting? Or worse, what if she admitted that something really was going on? So I stayed quiet, pretending everything was fine, but my mind was a tornado. Every time she picked up her phone and tilted it away from me, I noticed. Every time she smiled at a text and typed quickly, my stomach knotted. 2 nights later, I caught her outside on the porch, talking softly on the phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear her tone. It wasn't the way she talked to her friends or her mom. It was softer, lighter, like she was letting someone in on a secret. When I walked out, she ended the call fast, like she'd been burned. It was just work, she said, forcing a laugh. Work? At 10 p.m.? Hannah didn't even like her job enough to talk about it after hours. I tried to shake it off, but my gut wouldn't let me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I waited until she was in the shower the next morning, and I checked her phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. At first, everything looked normal, group chats, random memes, boring stuff. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, C. Just the letter. The messages weren't obvious. No, I love you, or anything like that. But the tone was different. Playful. Flirty. Like inside jokes I wasn't part of. One of the texts said, last night was worth it. My throat went dry. Worth what? What the hell was worth it? I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. I felt like I'd just swallowed a grenade, and I didn't know when it would explode. That entire day, I walked around like I was made of glass. She noticed. You're so quiet, she said, tilting her head at me like I was some puzzle she couldn't solve. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and shout, who is he? But instead, I just said, I'm tired, and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept replaying that dance in my head, her smile, the way she didn't even look at me. And now this guy, C. Could it be him? Was that dance just the tip of something much, much worse? Something inside me told me I was about to find out. And I wouldn't like what I discovered. I spent the next few days moving through my life like a ghost. I went to work, I answered emails, I even smiled at people when I had to, but inside I was unraveling. Every time I looked at Hannah, all I could see was that dance, that smile, and the shadow of the man whose name I still didn't know. The more I thought about those messages to see, the more it felt like poison was spreading through me. I didn't want to become the kind of man who snoops through his wife's life like a paranoid detective, but what choice did I have? She wasn't giving me answers. In fact, she was giving me fewer answers by the day. She started coming home later, claiming she was just grabbing drinks with coworkers or running errands. Sometimes she smelled like perfume that wasn't hers, a faint scent I couldn't place, like cologne and smoke. I told myself I was imagining it, but the pit in my stomach told me I wasn't. One evening, I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I told her I was working late and wouldn't be home until after midnight. It was a lie, but I wanted to see what she would do if she thought I was out of the picture. I parked my car 2 streets away from our house and waited. The hours crawled by. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I was seconds from driving home and pretending none of this was happening when I saw headlights approaching. It wasn't her car. It was a dark SUV, one I'd never seen before. It slowed down in front of our house, and my heart went into overdrive. Hannah stepped out of the passenger side, not the driver's. She laughed at something the driver said, leaning into the open window, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I saw her touch his hand. Then she turned and walked inside like it was the most normal thing in the world. I wanted to storm in there and end it all, demand answers, scream, throw every ugly word I'd been holding inside. But I didn't. I sat there in my car, my mind spinning, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. I needed proof. Real proof. Something undeniable. That night, while she was in the shower, I dug deeper into her phone. I found out C wasn't just some random name. It was Caleb, the same guy from the dance floor. I found messages that made my stomach twist, messages that weren't just friendly or flirty. They were intimate. Not explicit, but intimate in that dangerous way that tells you 2 people have crossed a line. The worst part? There was a message from him saying, "Can't stop thinking about how you looked last night." And her reply? "I can't stop thinking about it either." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling while she slept next to me, wondering when I'd stopped being enough for her. I kept hearing that line in my head. She danced with him like I was invisible. Maybe that's because, to her, I was. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurts. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was a wreck. My hands shook when I tried to drink my coffee. My mind was a constant loop of her laugh, her secretive smiles, that SUV pulling away from our house. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what kind of man Caleb was, what hold he had on her. My wife, the woman I'd shared years of my life with, was slipping away into a shadow I couldn't reach. And maybe I was too weak, too cowardly to confront her directly. But him? I could confront him. I found him faster than I expected. Small towns are like that. Everyone knows someone who knows everyone. A little digging online, and there he was, Caleb Ashford. He ran a construction business just a couple of neighborhoods away. There was a photo of him on Facebook, leaning against some truck, his arms folded, smirking like he owned the world. Something about that smirk made me want to punch through my screen. Saturday night, I did something I'm not proud of. I told Hannah I was meeting a friend for drinks, but instead, I drove to a bar I'd seen Caleb tagged in on social media. It wasn't even a fancy bar, just one of those dimly lit places where the music is too loud and everyone pretends they're having fun. I walked in and saw him almost immediately. He was sitting near the back, laughing with a couple of guys. He had this magnetic energy, like he knew every eye in the room would eventually turn to him. I stood there for a minute, trying to gather the courage to go over. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like I might black out. I wasn't the type to start a fight. Hell, I wasn't even the type to raise my voice. But I couldn't stop thinking about that text. I can't stop thinking about it either. Every time I replayed those words, my chest tightened like a vice. I walked up to him. I don't even remember what I said at first. Something pathetic, probably, like, "We need to talk." He looked up, slow and deliberate, and for a second, I saw a flicker of recognition. He didn't ask who I was. He just smiled that same smug smile and said, "Oh, you must be Hannah's husband." Hearing her name from his mouth felt like someone had poured gasoline on my anger. "Stay away from her," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever you think is happening, it's over." He laughed. He actually laughed, like I was some joke he'd been waiting to hear. Man, I think that's between me and Hannah, don't you? He said, leaning back in his chair like he was daring me to swing. And for a split second, I almost did. My fists clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked out of that bar, my entire body trembling. I'd never felt so humiliated in my life. He didn't take me seriously. Worse, I don't think Hannah would have taken me seriously either. When I got home, Hannah was already there, pretending to read on the couch. She looked up at me, smiling like nothing was wrong. I wanted to ask her where she'd been, if she'd seen him, if she was already planning her next dance. But I didn't. I just muttered something about being tired and went to bed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd get it myself, no matter what it took. By Monday, my resolve had hardened into something unrecognizable. I was no longer just suspicious. I was consumed. Every look, every laugh, every late text felt like evidence piling up against her. I didn't even feel like myself anymore. I used to be the guy who trusted people to a fault, the guy who believed love was simple, not something you had to track or test. But now I was waking up in the middle of the night, sweating and angry, with this raw ache in my chest because I knew, deep down, I wasn't wrong. Something was happening, and I was being treated like a fool. I needed proof, something I could hold in my hands and say, here, this is what you've done. So on Tuesday night, when she said she was working late, I didn't argue. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and told her to be safe. Then, 20 minutes later, I got in my car and followed her. I felt like a criminal, creeping down familiar streets with my headlights dimmed, my heart pounding with every turn she made. She drove out of town, past the usual bars and restaurants, until we ended up in a part of the city I didn't recognize, quiet streets with half-empty parking lots and old brick warehouses that looked abandoned. I stayed far enough behind to not be obvious, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. Then she turned into a narrow side street, parked, and walked toward one of those old warehouses. I waited, my breath caught in my throat, until I saw him, Caleb. He was already there, leaning against the door like he'd been waiting for her all along. She walked right up to him, and my world crumbled. She smiled, that same smile that used to be just for me. And then, without hesitation, she hugged him. It wasn't a polite hug. It wasn't the kind of hug you give an old friend. It was the kind that lingers, the kind that says something without words. I couldn't look away. I wanted to drive off and never see it again, but my hands wouldn't move. I stayed, watching from my car like some pathetic voyeur as they disappeared inside. 10 minutes passed, then 20. My mind was a storm of images, of her dancing, of those messages, of everything I thought I knew about her. Finally, I got out. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. Maybe storm in there. Maybe just see for myself. I crept up to the building, my footsteps loud against the silence. The front door was cracked, and I could hear voices inside. I pushed it open just enough to peek through. What I saw was nothing like what I expected. There was no romantic dinner, no candlelight, no intimate whispers. It was something stranger. The place was filled with boxes, tools, and sheets of paper scattered across tables. Hannah and Caleb weren't touching, they were arguing. Not loudly, but with this intensity that made my stomach twist. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. He can't find out, she said at one point, her voice sharp, almost panicked. And Caleb just shook his head, saying something I couldn't catch, his hand running through his hair like he was frustrated. My mind went wild. He can't find out? Who? Me? About what? Were they talking about an affair, or something worse? I stayed there, hidden in the shadows, listening to the sound of my own breath and trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was going on, Hannah was lying to me. Not just about Caleb, but about something bigger, something I wasn't ready to face. When I finally got back in my car, I was shaking so badly I could barely put the key in the ignition. The image of them together, whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear, burned into my brain. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was something deeper, darker. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was only scratching the surface. The entire next day, I couldn't focus on anything except what I'd seen and what I hadn't. My mind kept replaying Hannah's voice in that warehouse, sharp and almost desperate. He can't find out. The words had burned into me like a brand. She wasn't just hiding something small. There was weight behind those words. It wasn't a tone you used for a harmless secret. I felt like I was drowning in questions, and every time I looked at her, I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and demand the truth. But something inside me held back. Maybe it was fear. Fear of what I'd hear if she finally told me. That evening, I pretended everything was normal. We had dinner, and she asked about my day while absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. She was so casual, so convincing, that for a moment I wondered if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But then I remembered the messages with Caleb, that tight hug, the way she had said he can't find out. That wasn't in my head. I wasn't imagining it. Later that night, while she was taking a bath, I opened her laptop. I knew her password. She never changed it. It felt wrong, but I was beyond the point of worrying about what was right. I needed answers. And I found something. In her emails, there was a string of messages between her and Caleb, but they weren't about romance. They were talking about something called the ledger. It sounded like a business deal or something shady, but I couldn't tell what exactly it was. One of his emails said, "We can't keep this in the open. If he even gets a hint of it, we're done." My hands were shaking as I read through the threads. There were mentions of money, documents, and phrases like covering tracks and the last shipment. I didn't understand any of it, but it didn't feel like an affair anymore. It felt worse, like she was part of something secretive and dangerous. Something she didn't want me anywhere near. The next night, I decided to go back to the warehouse. I couldn't stop thinking about what they were hiding there. I waited until Hannah said she was going out for coffee with a friend. At that point, I didn't even bother pretending to believe her. I grabbed my keys and followed at a distance. Just like before, she ended up on that same narrow street, parking by the old warehouse. I waited until she went inside. Then I crept around the side of the building, my footsteps crunching softly on gravel. There was a cracked window near the back, just high enough for me to peek through if I stood on an old cinder block. When I finally pulled myself up, my breath caught. Inside, I saw Hannah and Caleb again, but this time they weren't arguing. They were moving quickly, almost frantically, stacking boxes and going through papers. There was a small safe on the table, wide open, with bundles of cash inside. Not a few bills, a lot. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. I felt my stomach twist as I tried to understand what I was looking at. What were they doing? Why would my wife have anything to do with this? Then, I heard Caleb's voice through the open crack of the window. "We have to finish this tonight. If someone talks, we're screwed." Hannah nodded, biting her lip. "I don't want him to find out. He can't handle this." My head was spinning. I didn't know if they were involved in something illegal, or if I had just stumbled into some secret life my wife had been living behind my back. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to get answers by watching from the outside anymore. When I got home, I stared at her phone sitting on the counter. I knew she'd locked it with a new passcode, but I also knew there was more inside it. Messages, calls, something that would explain this madness. My hands hovered over it, knowing that the second I broke into that phone, there would be no going back. I couldn't sleep that night, not with my mind tangled up in the images from the warehouse, those stacks of cash, the papers, the way Hannah's voice trembled when she said I couldn't handle this. I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her calm breathing while my heart felt like it was going to hammer its way out of my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her and Caleb, heads close together, whispering about things I wasn't supposed to know. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed the truth, even if it shattered everything. When I heard her soft snore, I carefully slid out of bed, grabbed her phone, and crept into the hallway like a thief in my own home. She had changed the passcode, but she'd always been predictable with numbers. I tried her birthday, my birthday, the day we got married, nothing. Then, almost on a whim, I tried Caleb's birth year. It unlocked. My stomach turned to ice. I went through the messages first. Most of their texts weren't romantic. There were no "I miss you" or "I love you" lines, nothing that would make this a straightforward affair. Instead, they were coded, tense, with words like "pick up," "documents," "it's moving faster than we thought," and "don't let him see anything." It was even worse than I imagined because now I couldn't even put it into a category like cheating. It was something murkier, something I couldn't fully understand. But then I found one message that made my skin crawl. Caleb had texted her just 2 days ago. "We'll have to disappear for a while once this is done. You know that, right?" Disappear? What the hell were they planning? I scrolled faster, my hands slick with sweat, until I found a video file she had saved from him. My heart sank as I hit play. It was grainy, shaky footage of that warehouse. Caleb was filming stacks of cash, stacks that looked like they came straight from a bank vault, and his voice in the background said, "This is real. We're almost there. Nobody can know." I had to put the phone down for a moment because my head was spinning. I didn't know if they were dealing with stolen money, some illegal scheme, or something even worse. But I knew I had to confront her, even if I was terrified of the answer. I walked back into the bedroom and stood over her, the glow of her phone still in my hand. I wanted to wake her up, to shake her and demand, "What the hell are you involved in? Who are you really?" But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to be smart. I needed to know everything before I said a word. The next day, I called out of work. I spent the morning driving circles around that part of town, hoping to see Caleb's SUV or some sign of what they were doing in that warehouse. I saw nothing, but something told me the real answers weren't in that building anymore. They were with Caleb himself. I needed to talk to him, face to face, without Hannah's shadow between us. That evening, I told Hannah I was meeting an old friend for dinner. She smiled, that perfect smile, and said, "Have fun." I almost laughed at how easily the lies slipped between us now. She didn't ask which friend or where I was going. Maybe she didn't care, or maybe she was too busy thinking about Caleb. I didn't go to dinner. I went to Caleb's business. It was closed, the lights off, but his truck was parked out back. I waited. I don't even know how long I sat there, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, rehearsing what I'd say. When he finally came out, carrying a black duffel bag that looked far too heavy to be innocent, I got out of my car. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just smirked, like this was some game. "You again," he said. "I thought I told you to stay out of this." I wanted to punch him right there, but I forced the words out instead. "What are you doing with my wife? What's going on in that warehouse?" He just laughed, shaking his head. "Man, you have no idea what you're standing in the middle of. Go home. Forget about this, or you'll regret it." The way he said it made my blood run cold. It wasn't a threat in the way people threaten when they're bluffing. It was calm, certain, like he knew something I didn't. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a cheating wife anymore. I was tangled in something bigger, something dangerous. And I had no idea how deep it went. I barely slept that night after my confrontation with Caleb. His words kept circling in my mind. "You have no idea what you're standing in the middle of." He wasn't just bluffing. His calmness was unnerving, like he genuinely believed I was out of my depth. And maybe I was. But I wasn't going to stop. I couldn't. I needed the truth, even if it burned me alive. The next morning, I finally broke. I sat Hannah down at the kitchen table. My voice was shaking, my hands trembling as I laid everything out. The messages I'd seen, the warehouse, the cash, Caleb. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face pale and unreadable. I thought she was going to deny everything, or worse, tell me she was leaving. But instead, she started to cry. Not the kind of guilty tears I'd imagined in my nightmares, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere I didn't recognize. "I wanted to tell you," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how. It's not what you think. Caleb isn't. He's not what you think he is." I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at her, waiting for the truth to fall like a hammer. And when it came, it wasn't what I expected. She told me the money wasn't stolen. It was a fundraiser, an underground effort to help a group of families who had lost everything after a fire in the next town over. Caleb had been a childhood friend of hers, and he was spearheading the effort quietly because the families didn't want media attention or charity headlines. The ledger I'd seen in the emails, it was just a record of donations, a list of people they were trying to help. The hug, the secretive tone, the phrase "he can't find out." It wasn't about cheating. It was about me, but for a reason I hadn't expected. Hannah knew how anxious and suspicious I could get, especially since my trust had been shaken in the past. She'd been afraid I'd misunderstand, afraid I'd see the money or Caleb's involvement and think exactly what I did, that she was betraying me. I sat there, stunned, as she explained everything. Caleb wasn't her lover. He was just the guy who handled the logistics. The reason she looked guilty that night at the festival? Because she had been lying about where she was spending her evenings. Not with Caleb romantically, but organizing this secret charity drive. And that dance, the thing that had burned itself into my memory. She swore it was nothing but a few minutes of being caught up in the music, and that she regretted it the second she saw my face. I wanted to be angry, but all I felt was relief. Relief so powerful that I actually laughed, a strange, broken laugh that made her laugh too, through her tears. We sat there for a long time, just holding each other, both of us realizing how close we'd come to losing everything over a misunderstanding. That weekend, she took me to the warehouse. She introduced me to Caleb properly, and I saw everything with my own eyes. The supplies, the lists, the families they were helping. I even helped pack boxes for delivery, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't in the dark anymore. Our marriage isn't perfect. It probably never will be. But that whole ordeal did something unexpected. It pulled us closer. We talked more in those few days than we had in years. We rebuilt something that had been quietly crumbling, even before Caleb came into the picture. Sometimes I still think about that night, about how one dance nearly tore us apart. But now, when I see Hannah smile, I know it's real, and I know it's mine. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not invisible anymore.